Good evening.
Now we know. That explains a lot.
He's a cat person?
Yeah.
Welcome, everyone. It's good to see you all. Y'all. I say that just like I'm Southern, don't I?
You lived here too long.
Been here since my freshman year in high school, so I guess I qualify, don't I? So, let's bow our heads. Father in heavenly, truly we are fearfully and wonderfully made. And Lord, as we look a little bit into tonight, some of the mechanisms involved in health and happiness, we pray, Lord, that you will clear our understanding, that you will help us to see the wonderful things that you've put in place to keep us healthy. And Lord, that we'll determine to do everything we can to be faithful stewards of the bodies you've given to us. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Tonight's topic is called Cellular Mechanisms. I'm not a doctor. I don't play one on TV. But I have done quite a bit of research because I wanted to know something about this mysterious thing called medicine. It's, you get these little white pills and they don't all look much different one from another, but they all seem to do all these amazing things in our bodies, and I wanted to know what was going on, how they worked. They're not magic, and so I'm going to try to explain it very simply tonight, and I'm doing that partly because if you get complicated, you lose people, and partly because if it wasn't simple, I wouldn't be able to explain it. So, cellular mechanisms. There are trillions of cells in our bodies. There are different cells designed for specific purposes. There are bone cells, liver cells, skin cells, muscle cells, brain cells, and many more. These cells group together to form bones, skin, muscles, the brain, and other organs. How do our bodies accomplish the various functions that keep us alive and allow us to engage in everyday activities? How do certain cells of the pancreas produce insulin? Why do muscles contract? How do liver cells make bile? How does the mucous membrane of the stomach manufacture hydrochloric acid and not be dissolved by it? And how is a molecule of hemoglobin fabricated? In a living organism, all this happens because of millions upon millions of complex biochemical activities proceeding at incredible speeds within the cells that make up the tissues of our organs and bodies. So you follow that so far? Pretty much everything about our bodies is determined by activities of the cells. And mostly what goes on there are biochemical reactions and activities. Dr. Mervyn Harding describes a cell as a tiny chemical factory. Each cell has a very particular work to do, and each cell faithfully performs its task. The work is actually done by specifically designed proteins that are called enzymes. Since it takes several steps to manufacture a product, such as insulin or hemoglobin, the cell has the various enzymes arranged in a well-organized assembly line. Each enzyme performs a single operation and passes what it has produced on to the next stage until the substance is complete. Every individual factory, each cell, has an outside covering called a cell membrane. In these walls, there are ports through which substances can enter the cell. Outside the ports, there are other specialized enzymes that are port keepers to control the gates opening and closing them. Got it so far? We've got a cell. There's a membrane around the cell, but there are openings where things can pass in and out. But not just anything can pass in and out. There are actually port keepers that keep certain things in and let certain things in and keep other things out or let other things out. There are receptors on the surface of the cells that act like locks. requiring the correct keys or regulators to activate them. So from the outside, a regulator can influence the operation inside a cell by attaching to a receptor on the surface of the cell walls. These keys or regulators are chemical molecules. Chemicals have shape, and each lock requires a special shape for the chemical to influence the cell. Chemicals properly shaped for a specific receptor are called regulators. They're the keys because they regulate the activity in the cell. So here's a picture. Can everybody see that? I can come back farther if not. Well, yeah, not everybody has the book with them. But anyway, so this is just actually just a conceptual picture. That's not really what a cell or a receptor or that sort of thing looks like, but it's the idea. There are certain parts of the cell that have to have certain chemicals to activate or deactivate or have some influence on what's going on inside of the cell. Other things that aren't shaped right just pass on by and they don't have an effect on the cell. So we got receptors and regulators. What's the difference between a receptor and a regulator? The receptor is a part of a cell that has a specific shape, and the regulator is just some chemical that's maybe free-floating that has to fit into that receptor in order to have an effect on what's going on in the cell. Our bodies are biochemical machines, and if properly nourished, our cells manufacture all the proper chemicals and automatically regulate all the biochemical activity necessary for life and health. Complex chemical substances drive all the functions of the body, and the production and release of these complex chemical substances is accomplished and regulated by the tiny chemical factories, their ports, locks, and keys. Now, this is an important point. Every regulator that is needed in the body comes from where? It's made by the body. And this is important because every regulator is the exact perfect shape to fit the receptors that the regulator is supposed to fit. Perfect fit. Now this is important because when we come to medicine, the purpose of medicine, doctors will tell you that medicine really don't create function within the body. They just modify the functions that the cells are already there to do. So they can come up with chemical compounds to try to fit these receptors to turn on or turn off or slow down or to speed up what those cells already do. They don't do something new, they just somehow modify the process to speed up or slow down, modulate function. Is that clear? And so what doctors and scientists, researchers try to do is come up with chemical substances that have the shapes that are necessary to fit into the receptors of the cells that they want to activate or deactivate or affect in some way. Does that make sense? So that's really what medicine is all about. It's just chemicals that they've put together, or come up with, or discovered, or through research somehow have figured out actually fit the receptors of the cells that do something that they want to somehow increase or turn down. Well, what's the problem with that? There's a couple problems. One problem is the chemicals that we use for medicine aren't exact matches to the shapes. They fit close enough so that they actually attach to the receptors, but there's whole other parts of the chemicals that have whole different shapes that actually fit other cells in the body activating or deactivating or somehow causing havoc within other cells of the body. So with medicine, there is always side effects. And the side effects are caused by the fact that these chemical compounds that we use for medicine not only fit the cells we're trying to influence, they also fit other cells in the body that we aren't trying to influence. And really, because it's such a complex process, a lot of times they really don't know what cells are being affected how. And so what's a common side effect for medicine? Dizziness, nauseous, headaches, dry mouth. All these are caused by the fact that these chemicals that we take with the medicines, as medicines, somehow affect a part of the body that regulates some of these things. That somehow activates something in the head, it causes a headache, or it activates something in your salivary glands that makes your mouth get dry. Yeah, Joseph.
I guess to begin with, the problem is they're man-made. They're artificial. They are lab.
Well, not always. Right, a lot of them are derived and synthetic, and some of them are taken from just natural minerals. Some of them are taken from plants and different things. But yeah, they're manipulated in a way where quite often they're not found in nature. Even concentrated, sometimes is very significant. We'll get to that. There's another problem. Okay, first I'd like to quote something. Dr. Elliot Ross, the University of Texas. We've already mentioned this, but this is how he puts it. A drug potentially is capable of altering the rate at which any body function proceeds. Drugs do not create effect, but they modulate functions. Okay, so we've talked about that. And Dr. Harding says, at any moment within and around the cells of the body, a bewildering array of complex chemical processes are taking place at incredible speeds. They give us life and allow us to function. Both regular and botanic drugs influence them. Their chemical shapes allow them to behave as regulators, influencing either the cell's external or internal chemistry. Usually they affect an organ or system in a way we consider beneficial. Other parts of the drug molecule, though, can interfere with cell process elsewhere in the body, resulting in an adverse or toxic response. Another quote from Dr. Harding: when a substance not normally a constituent of the body, such as a drug, enters the bloodstream and passes into tissue fluids, its shape resembles only part of the natural regulator molecule. The conforming part attaches to the target receptors and accomplishes the purpose the patient intended. However, another part of the drug molecule interacts with other unwanted receptors, for example, on the cells of the salivary glands and on certain neurons in the brain, causing dryness of mouth or drowsiness, producing what we call side effects. A drug's molecular shape may be such that it may jam certain cell receptors, inactivate enzymes on the cell membrane, or passing through a port in the cell wall, raise havoc from within the cell. Such adverse responses can seem minor, or they can be extremely severe. And there's another problem that we can come up with. It's not just the fact that the shapes may or may not fit very well. It's also the idea of toxicity. Side effects are not the only issue associated with using outside chemicals to regulate internal processes. Another is a matter of dosage. As already noted, it takes a certain amount of any medicine to produce the desired effect. But as the amount increases, so does toxicity. Unfortunately, the body's mechanisms for determining the precise needed dose do not communicate with the outside world. a person's weight, race, gender, age, etc. These are all factors that influence dosage requirements, but these are just a few. Some people are hypersensitive to some chemicals. Chemicals interact with foods and other drugs, and the ever-changing biochemistry with inside and outside the body. All these things affect how well a drug will fit the shape of the receptors, the number of receptors present in the tissue, and how many receptors are actually available for the drug molecule to attach to. These things all affect dosage. Any questions? You following it? I don't think it's very complicated, but if it's all new terminology, sometimes it's easy to get confused. So basically, doctors really can't arrive at the perfect dosage for a chemical to do what it needs to do, because the perfect dosage would be just enough to do what needs to be done and no more, because anytime there's more, that is having an effect somewhere else and causing some damage. So what they do is they come up with target, formularies or whatever, which basically are there to come up with a dosage which is usually enough in most cases to have the desired effect, regardless of a person's, various different things going on in their body, but not so high that it's going to have adverse effects to the point where it really interferes with what's going on in somebody's life. So they're always kind of over-hitting the target, but trying not to overhit it so much that it causes any severe problems. Also, I think it's helpful to understand within the body, in any factory, because, they've used the analogy that the cells are like factory. In any factory setting, there's certain environmental considerations that need to be understood and taken care of. The body naturally produces the perfect chemical shapes to manage its own biochemistry, but site contamination can interfere with the manufacturing process and damage the final product. So it's necessary to prevent unwanted and harmful substances from entering the system. Several environmental safeties are built into the human organism. Skin is one of these. It is an important barrier against dirt, viruses, bacteria, the saltiness and sweat and tears provide further protection. Mucus guards openings. Mechanisms such as coughing, sneezing, vomiting, and diarrhea also prevent contamination from getting into the blood system and finding their way to the cellular level. These are the body's environmental defenses. Because drug medications are not normal constituents of the body, a lot of times the body considers them a contaminants, and so it is also actually trying to get them out of the system, which actually drives up the amount of drug that needs to be administered, because your body's going to just try to get rid of a certain amount of it. So this is one of the environmental things to consider about the body. Now, I'd like to point out here, and this isn't in the book, but I think once you think about it, it's pretty easy to see. What are the 8 natural remedies? Sunshine, air, exercise, rest, nutrition, abstemiousness or temperance, trusting God. I think we're all familiar with what they are. So when it comes to environmental protection, how many of those actually work in that capacity? Temperance and abstemiousness, obviously it's keeping contaminants out because we're not putting them in, right? Or if we are putting some things in that are healthy in moderation, we're not overdoing it. Cleanliness, keeping clean, obviously, is part of the process. Especially in the environment today, pollutants are everywhere, and a lot of chemicals are actually absorbed through the skin. Sunlight, how does sunlight help? Okay. So sunlight actually has some functions that help keep chemicals and various contaminants out of the body. I think just the fact that the sunlight quite often produces sweat is actually helpful as well. Clean air is obvious, I think, and clean water. If you're using clean air and clean water, you're not bringing those in with your air and your water unnecessarily. And this is a factor I think sometimes maybe in this day and age we don't consider enough. A lot of the air that we breathe is probably not clean air. And a lot of the water we drink has all kinds of things that are in it, either from pollution or actually added by some of the water authorities for some purpose. So we see that quite a few of the natural remedies deal with this environmental protection part of trying to keep things out of the body that will cause problems there. Now, supply side, a proper supply chain is also important to the body. The cells need certain raw materials before they can manufacture the right chemicals for optimum health and function. These raw materials are supplied through eating, drinking, breathing, and some are absorbed through the skin. The body's digestive system breaks down food into the components or nutrients needed so that the bloodstream can supply them to all areas of the body. Nutrient-rich plasma passes out through the walls of the blood vessels and into the walls of the cells. In fact, this clear watery spa of oxygen and nutrition bathe the cells inside and out. The lungs process the air we breathe, passing necessary airborne components to the blood. The body's lymph system picks up things absorbed through the skin and helps them find their way into the bloodstream. Our body's supply side systems know what our bodies need, and God designed them to select specifically what is good and necessary and dump the rest. But these systems have their limits. We must properly care for them. The digesting organs are designed for real food in manageable quantities and in simple configurations. They need clean water. The lungs need pure, fresh air. When we abuse these systems, they become confused and overwhelmed. So, let's ask the same question about the supply side. What of the natural remedies actually help us with the supply side? Temperance, nutrition, clean air, clean water, right? Some of the same ones. So we see actually some of these natural remedies work on all the fronts to help keep our bodies clean and safe in the environments for the work that the cells has to do to be optimum and out of danger. Another one you might put in there is herbs. You know, Spirit of Prophecy talks about the Lord has put herbs out there for us to use when we get sick. And so there are probably compounds within herbs that you're not going to find in your normal food that God has put there so that we can use them in a special situation and get some of those things that will help improve our health when we're having a struggle. And then the third one I want to mention is waste management. Even under ideal circumstances, the body must deal with waste products. The biochemistry within the cells themselves produce waste products that are toxic. Food, water, and air all bring components into the body that it must remove. The body has built-in mechanisms to process and remove waste products. The kidney filters out waste products into the urine. The liver filters out waste products through the bile duct into the feces. The lung expels waste products into the air we exhale. And the skin disposes of waste products through sweating. Blood plasma not only bathes our cells with oxygen and nutrients, it also carries away waste. In this capacity, it is called lymphatic fluid. Now, this is important because what pumps our blood? The heart. What pumps our lymphatic fluid? Our muscles when we move. There is no pump, per se, for the lymph system. We have lymph vessels, and there's even valves to keep things moving in one way. But it requires the muscles that we use to move to actually push that stuff through the system to the lymph nodes where they're filtered and then back into the blood system. And so what happens if we don't move? Become sluggish, our bodies become overwhelmed with toxins. And our lymph systems, notice how there are certain parts of our bodies that seem to get sore and have problems when we're sick? It's those systems that are trying to filter out this lymph fluid, get the contaminants out of there. All organic waste materials eventually become toxic. In the warm, moist environment of the body, it quickly breaks down and putrefies, creating toxins. God designed human digestion to work quickly and then to dump waste before they load the system with toxins. So what are some of the things that we can eat that slow down the digestive system?
Meat.
To slow it down, not speed it up. Meat slows it way down. Water slows it down?
Yeah,
It can.
A lot of water when you're eating.
Right. Yeah, it has to get rid of that water before it can go on. Cheese can slow it way down. Actually, a lot of, and pretty much any kind of animal protein is going to slow it down. And so one way to keep our system moving the way it needs to move is to eat a vegetarian diet. And another way is to eat a vegan diet. That even keeps it moving more quickly. That I can't answer. I don't know. Probably not as long as a hamburger. Since the body always works within the framework of trying to preserve health, its first defense against toxins is to eliminate them through one of the normal elimination channels. Overloaded channels trigger more drastic measures. Any idea what the drastic measures are? Pretty much it's anything you don't enjoy that happens when you start feeling sick. Are some drastic measures. Diarrhea, coughs, rashes, fevers, mucus discharge. These are examples of more drastic measures. But what happens if something interrupts these attempts to purge the system? What if these processes are already too overwhelmed to be effective? What if the body is too fatigued or is dealing with some other crisis and cannot spare the resources to fight toxin right now? Under these circumstances, what do you think the body does?
It's sick.
Well, you could say it's already sick at that point. What if you're sick and you still don't have time? Now, this is a real thing. It's something my wife has noticed quite a long time ago. She can go months and months and months and even years without getting sick, but the minute she has some time to actually sit down for a few days, she gets deathly sick. It's because the body says, well, it's time now to get rid of some of this stuff because she's not so busy, because you know my wife, she's busy. She's not so busy that it'll kill her to do it. And so what does that mean happens when the body doesn't feel like it has the resources to fight them? What does the body do with them? It stores them. Where do you think it stores them? Knowing better than to keep excess toxins around the production areas of the body, most important biochemistry labs, the body tries to store toxins in less sensitive areas. It stores excess toxins in fat tissue. It stores excess toxin in myelin. That's the fatty sheath that insulates the nerves. It stores excess toxins in connective tissues like ligaments, bones, blood. It stores excess toxins in muscle tissue or in nerve tissue. As toxins accumulate in fat tissue, things like cysts, Lymphomas and other benign tumors can develop. As toxins accumulate around the nerves, they can cause irritation and headaches. As toxins accumulate in connective tissue, generalized joint pain or aches and pains in the various bones can occur. If they are exposed to toxins long enough, even the cells can accumulate them in their inner membranes and inner lumen areas. If enough cells of one organ or gland becomes dysfunctional because of the buildup of toxins, organ or glandular dysfunction can occur. Thyroid disease, impaired vision, congestive heart failure, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, kidney failure, and any stage of liver degeneration are examples of some of these things that occur. You know, you can read about it sometimes on the internet because this whole cleansing thing is quite popular among some circles, and of course they come up with all these different kinds of cleanses. And also these diets that can really burn off fat really quickly. What was one of the things that people who do this a lot will tell you? If you burn off your fat too quickly, what will happen? It'll make you sick. And it's not the burning of fat that makes you sick, because your body's designed to burn fat. But it's the chemicals and the toxins and everything that has been stored in your fat for years and years and years. Once it's stored in there, it's hard to get it back out again. And so when they start burning fat, is that called ketosis? Is that what they call ketosis? When they stop burning fat, if you do it too quickly and you've got a lot of these toxins stored in the fat, it'll make you sick. So. All right, we're almost done with this part. If the innermost part, the nucleus basically, of enough cells in one area accumulate enough toxins, the DNA that controls those cells can become affected. Excuse me. That can lead to a lack of control over cellular reproduction, which is the hallmark of malignant growth or cancer. So you see how all this kind of works. It's because we're getting these toxins in our bodies and we're not getting rid of them in a timely manner. And so the body stores them, and if it stores them, then you start feeling pain. And then if you keep storing and you keep storing, then you start having organs that start having problems. And then if you keep going and keep going, you can actually have cancer develop because of all these toxins that get stored in places of the body where they shouldn't be. It's important to note that as our bodies accumulate toxins and develop dysfunction and disease, it's constantly doing the best it can with the resources it has to cleanse and repair itself. It is well designed to do this work of recognizing and eliminating toxins, but it is our responsibility to minimize our exposure to these toxins and to provide our bodies with the support they need to clear out those that make their way into our system. We call this cleansing activity hygienic health care, and it is a fundamentally different approach to health care than normal health care. So you catch that, because this is important. You really can't understand medical missionary work unless you realize that the whole system of health care that God has given us works on a completely different system than the health care that the world has chosen. The health care that God has given us is one of cleansing the system and giving it an environment where the body can do the best it can to get rid of the things that are causing problems and disease. Over here on this side, the world system is you use chemical molecules to try to manage what's going on in the cells in a way that somehow seems to benefit you, to help get you better, to help you feel better, and that sort of thing. The problem with this type of approach is that very process adds more toxins to the body. You see the difference? So this one basically says God designed us for our bodies to cleanse and heal itself. This side basically says we got to do it ourselves. We got to manipulate the system God has given us using a process that actually makes it worse, not better. So this is how we can understand some of the statements that Ellen White has said, how drug medications, what they do to the body. Drugs never heal, she says. She says it moves the condition from one area to another. See how that works? She says it moves it from something we're dealing with now sometimes to something else that we'll be dealing with in the future. See, it all makes sense if you understand the difference between the two systems. She's not just anti-drug because she wants to be difficult. She's anti-drug because a drug actually sets you up for problems later. Now, I'm not really happy about it. I would like to quit my job because my job is takes me from nursing home and to long-term health care houses here and there, taking medicines. They pay me to deliver these totes of medicines there. But what it has done is it's given me a chance to see what's going on at that stage of people's lives. And I'm telling you, by the time you get into a nursing home, when we get an admission on the weekend, I get called in because on Sundays I'm on call. When a nursing home takes a new patient, they can't take any of their medicines with them because they don't know. The nurses at the nursing home don't know where they've been or even what they are sometimes, you know. They don't know the dose. They don't know. I mean, they can't be responsible for them because they didn't get them from a source that they can trust. And so I have to go in and deliver whole new sets of medicines. And it's very rare that I don't have to take in stacks and stacks of cards. They put them in cards, so there's one for every day for each kind. Stacks and stacks of cards for one patient. 18, 20 different medications. And then when you're in there and you meet these people, they're a wreck. Now you can say that they would have been a wreck without the medicine, and it's hard to prove one way or another that they may have been or may not have been. But I know of also people who are in their 80s and 90s who live at home that may take one or two kinds of medicine that their doctors prescribe, but they're not taking 18, 20 different medications. They're alert, they're healthy, they're able to get around, they drive. It just makes you wonder, you know, what are we doing to ourselves when we try to fix everything that goes wrong with us by adding something that is going to add a toxin to our system that's going to pay a dividend later. Does that make sense? Okay. What about herbs? This is where I make enemies amongst conservative people. We need to say something about herbs. Many herbal formulas are drugs. They really are. Made from chemicals derived from medicinal foods or medicinal herbs. They have the same pharmacological effects and use the same cellular mechanisms as any other drugs. In fact, a lot of drugs come from herbs. Digitalis comes from a flower of a plant that is extremely deadly. So deadly that it will stop your heart just like that. You know what they use it for? And they probably use it for several things. But one thing is to slow your heart down. They just give you enough to slow it down, not completely stop it. But it's a poison. It's a deadly poison. And it comes from a plant. So I guess the point here is a lot of times they make their drugs out of herbs. So what makes an herb, a good thing or a bad thing?
Value. Value comes from polarity.
Yeah. But this, so how are they different? Actually, when the chemicals are extracted from the herb or concentrated, sometimes there's little difference. But medicinal foods and medicinal herbs themselves are different, even if they do activate, some of their ingredients do activate some of the same cellular mechanisms and produce the same pharmacological effects. It's a matter of design. God designed the herbs. And in the herbs, He's taken into account everything that is necessary for their safe use. Dosage, putting chemicals together in ways that actually support each other, that actually work together. He's made them in ways to where that they can have some effect on the body without having terrible negative side effects like the thing. So it's different. But the trick is you have to take them the way God gave them to us. You can't start pulling out the active ingredients and concentrating and turning them into powerful, powerful things that have effects on the cells that God never intended and the body can't handle. Follow what I'm saying? And there's a real temptation to just actually stop using the medicines the doctors prescribe and then go to the shelf at the drugstore or the health food store and start coming up with different concoctions that may be as strong or even more potent than what you can get at the pharmacy. A lot of people are doing that. And with a lot of people, they don't know what they're doing. And so they're not really aware of what kind of effect they're having on their bodies. When I was growing up, I had an aunt who really liked Shackley. She was a Shackley distributor, and she just had gobs of bottles of Shackley. Her husband used to call them her tablets. She loves her tablets. And she had a pill for everything. Did God really design us to get our nutrition from a pill? Now, Vicki Jorgensen, and I want to get this quote sometime, so I'm just taking it from that book Ellen White says. She says that Ellen White is actually offended, that God is actually offended when we insinuate that He hasn't given us everything in our food for health and well-being. And really, we're trained to think that way in this day and age. Somehow we always feel like we have to supplement. But God has designed our food to be the source of the nutrition we need to stay healthy. And when that doesn't work, she says it's not a lack of faith to use the herbs that God has given us to help us when we get sick. So what are some of the best ways to use herbs? There are a number of ways. So you can take them whole, right? Whole's probably the best if your system can take it. Teas are a good way. I think you can actually even, to a limited extent, you make tinctures out of them. You can extract, some of the stuff. So I would say the best way is whole, and then teas I think are a good way. I think tinctures can work sometimes. You got to watch tinctures because sometimes we have a tendency to kind of concentrate that a bit, and it might be too much for the body. Really, a lot of times what we want to do is give the body the tools it needs to build the chemicals, molecules that it needs to be the activators for the cells. We're not trying to use the herbs to activate them directly. We're wanting to give the body what it needs to build what it needs to activate them. I think that's a far better approach. Joseph.
Yeah, I don't know if you showed there, covered this, but the problem with food is that it's been so manipulated now over decades that even though if the product itself, like the cucumber, whatever it may be, itself is still what God would have us eat, but it's so manipulated that, poisons on it or, GMO, whatever.
Right.
That it's not as easy anymore to just say, well, let's rely on the food.
Yeah.
The soil has been depleted greatly.
A lot of these things work together because we're told that we should learn how to grow our own food where we can control some of that. But you're right, the GMO, you don't know what you're dealing with the GMO. I think with the other types of processes they use to breed plants and come up with new varieties. I think those are relatively safe because I think they work within a lot of the controls that God has put there. But once they get down to the molecular level and start changing things, well, then they're messing with areas that they shouldn't be. And then the additives to foods, whether they're fresh produce with the chemical additives they use to grow them, or in prepared foods, the additives that build up in our system year after year are all contaminants that the body has to deal with. Yeah, Joseph?
Yeah. Well, they say that spinach in the 50s had 60% more nutrients in it than spinach today. The soil is so depleted.
Right.
They don't give the Sabbath rest to the land.
Yeah.
There's more fertilizer. Chemical. It's different. Correct.
So let me read something from Dr. Colin Campbell from his book, The China Study. He tells us to take a small look at the biochemistry of a meal. Let's say you prepare sautéed spinach with ginger and whole grain ravioli shells stuffed with butternut squash and spices, topped with tomato sauce. I hope you've all eaten something. The spinach alone is a cornucopia of various chemical compounds. So you've just introduced a bundle of nutrients into your body. In addition to this extraordinary complex mix, when you take a bite of the ravioli with the tomato sauce and squash filling, you get thousands and thousands of additional chemicals, all connected in ways in different foods, in each different foods, truly a biochemical bonanza. As soon as the food hits your saliva, your body begins working its magic and the process of digestion starts. Each of these food chemicals interact with other food chemicals, and your body's chemicals in very specific ways. It is an infinitely complex process, and it is literally impossible to understand precisely how each chemical interacts with every other chemical. We will never understand how it all fits together. The chemicals we get from our food we eat are engaged in a series of reactions that work in concert to produce good health. These chemicals are carefully orchestrated by intricate controls within our cells and all through our bodies. And these controls decide what nutrients goes where and how much of each nutrient is needed and when each reaction takes place. This all happens with food because God designed our body to get its nutrition that way. So He designed our systems to be able to sort it out and deal with it. Now, you can overload it. You can overcomplicate a meal to the point where it really taxes your system a lot just to try to digest it. And that's why we're told to try to keep our combinations simple. But the point is here, if we stick to what God has designed and what He's put together, our body can deal with it. But when we start grabbing chemicals here and there and we start shoving them all together, we don't know what's going to happen. Scientists don't know what's going to happen. They don't know what damage they're doing. They can't know what damage. It's just far too complex. And so when Ellen White says that that medicines are all poison, she's talking about the fact that every time we start putting these chemicals together, we're coming up with compounds that we're putting in our bodies that are causing damage somewhere in our system. She says we shouldn't do that because food doesn't do that. The makeup of foods, the compounding of different chemicals for specific purposes, the concentrations, factors involving interactivity and reactivity, additives to promote absorption, improve effectiveness, to provide for safe function. These things a wise and loving Creator has engineered right into the genetic codes of fruits and vegetables and grains and nuts. Even the unbeliever accepts that fruits, nuts, grains, and vegetables have amazing properties for health and healing. They just do. There's nothing that beats them, and they know that. Maybe the pharmacologists would design their products that way too if they could, but they can't. They don't know how. The complexity of all of it boggles the mind. The best human scientists can produce are fairly blind stabs at it. We have no way of measuring or understanding or controlling all the mechanisms and activities involved. Neither can we measure or control all the effects that any one chemical manipulation will have upon the complex biochemistry of the body. So why do we try? Isn't that the bigger question? We could similarly ask, why break whole foods into its various components and then reassemble them into refined foods? If whole foods perfectly meet the nutritional needs of the body, why should we change them? If our bodies are designed for health and contain all the mechanisms for health maintenance and health restoration, then why do we reach for the magic pills? Maybe we shouldn't ask this question. The only plausible answer is an uncomfortable one. Fallen man is no more content with obeying God's physical laws than we are with obeying His moral laws. We change the food chain to cater to our sinful appetites, and then we turn to the tree of knowledge to engineer fixes for our ruined health. How is pharmacology unlike a modern Tower of Babel? It seeks no faith. It requires no confession or repentance. It is not selective or judgmental. It promises to serve all people equally without regards of religion or lifestyle choices. It tries to restore health to the lawless, and it lifts people high above the floodwaters of consequences. So, let me just read a few things. We've kind of looked at some of the science involved. Does it make sense? I will say, have I achieved what I'm trying to achieve here? But you don't know what I'm trying to achieve here, so how can you answer that? But I think you understand it. Does anybody have any questions? Is there parts of it that you don't understand that need clarification? So I want to take a moment here to read through some stuff from Revelation. We've looked at the science, now let's look at Revelation. And this, a few quotations, several from the Spirit of Prophecy. For some reason the type's small, so I can't see it. Okay. Starts on this page. She says, nothing should be put into the human system that will leave a baleful influence behind. And to carry out the light on this subject, to practice hygienic treatment, is the reason which has been given me for establishing sanitariums in various locations. Is that clear? So now we understand the difference between the two approaches of health. Obviously, the reason she was told we needed to establish sanitariums was for what purpose? For a hygienic approach rather than an approach that adds toxins and poisons to the system. She says Christ's remedies cleanse the system. See? Cleanse the system. See the difference? But Satan has tempted men to introduce into the system that which weakens the machinery. So what's she talking about there? Drugs, food additives, just all kinds of different things, right? Anything that the devil can inspire people to do to mess with the food chain, he's done. Or the treatment of drugs. But Satan has tempted man to introduce into the system that which weakens the machinery, clogging and destroying the fine, beautiful arrangement of God. The drugs administered to the sick do not restore, but destroy. They are seeds that bear a very bitter harvest. Another one. We must leave drugs entirely alone, for in using them we introduce an enemy into the system. I write this because we have to meet this drug medication in the physicians of this country, and we do not want this practice to steal in amongst our midst. So she was really subtle about it, wasn't she? I mean, drugs never cure disease. They only change the form and location. So we see how that works now, right? Nature alone is the effectual restorer, and how much better could she perform her task if left to herself? When drugs are introduced into the system, for a time they may seem to have a beneficial effect. A change may take place, but the disease is not cured. It will manifest itself in some other form. And the disease which the drug was given to cure may disappear, but only to reappear in a new form, such as a skin disease, ulcers, painful disease joints, and sometimes in more dangerous and deadly forms. The liver, heart, and brain are frequently affected by drugs, and often all these organisms are burdened with disease. She was very specific, wasn't she? I mean, sometimes people say that she said what she said because she didn't really understand what she was talking about. She seems to understand it here, doesn't she? Administering drugs to the sick is the precise track marked out by the medical men of the world. We do not need this. The sufferers in such case can do for themselves that which others cannot do for them. They should commence to relieve nature of the load they have forced upon her. They should remove the cause, fast for a short time, and give the stomach a chance to rest. Reduce the feverish state of the system by a careful and understanding application of water. These efforts will help nature in her struggles to free the system of impurities. But generally, the persons who suffer pain become impatient. They are not willing to use self-denial and suffer a little from hunger. Neither are they willing to wait for the slow process of nature to build up the overtaxed energies of the system. But they are determined to obtain relief at once and take powerful drugs prescribed by physicians. Nature was doing her work well and should have triumphed. But while accomplishing her task, a foreign substance of a poisonous nature was introduced. What a mistake. Abused nature now has two evils to war against instead of one. She leaves the work in which she was engaged and resolutely takes hold to expel the intruder newly introduced into the system. Nature feels this double draft upon her resources and she becomes enfeebled. Now this is important because actually sometimes, quite often, to do this the natural way does take time, and it is uncomfortable, and it requires, a lot of times for a lot of people, it requires that there is somebody who cares about them, who's willing to help them. Sometimes we're willing to just kind of stick with things a little longer if someone's there pulling for us, helping us, coaching us, doing what they can to relieve the discomfort, doing hot and cold, that sort of thing. It actually is a beautiful mix for the gospel because it puts us right in their house, caring and loving and singing and reading and doing all the things that we wish we had an opportunity to do with people. Right? It seems like so often we just don't see because of the nose on our face. Nature will want some assistance in bring things to their proper condition, which may be found in the simplest remedies, especially in the use of nature's own furnished remedies, pure air and the precious knowledge of how to breathe, pure water with the knowledge of how to apply it, plenty of sunlight in every room of the house, if possible, and with an intelligent knowledge of what advantages are to be gained by its use. All these are powerful in their efficiency. And the patient who has obtained a knowledge of how to eat and dress healthfully may live in comfort, for peace, for health, and will not prevail upon to put into his lips drugs which, in the place of healing nature or helping nature, paralyzes her powers. If the sick and suffering will do only as well as they know in regards to living out the principles of health reform perseveringly, then they will in 9 cases out of 10 recover from their ailments. Just a couple more. Nature's simple remedies will aid in recovery without leaving the deadly after effects so often felt by those poisonous drugs. This is God's method, the herbs that grow for the benefit of man, and the little handful of herbs kept and steeped and used for sudden ailments have served tenfold, yes, even 100-fold better purposes than all the drugs hidden under mysterious names and dealt out to the sick. It would have been better if from the first all drugs had been kept out of our sanitariums and use had been made of such simple remedies as are found in pure water, pure air, sunlight, some of the simplest herbs growing in the field. These would be just as efficacious as the drugs used under mysterious names and concocted by human science, and they would leave no injurious effects to the system. And this is the last one. The Lord has provided antidotes for disease in simple plants, and these can be used by faith with no denial of faith. For by using the blessings provided by God for such benefit, we are cooperating with Him. We can use water and sunshine and the herbs which He causes to grow in healing maladies brought on by indiscretion or accident. We do not manifest a lack of faith when we ask God to bless His remedies. Now, later in the book, there's a chapter called Navigating the Twilight Zone, and it again deals with the medicine issue, and it deals with it quite directly. And I think there's some things in there that you would probably really like, so I'm going to encourage you to look at them. It's not part of this series. Now, there is a section there, if you got a minute, it's just a couple paragraphs, but it basically, I do this thing where I will stitch together, just bunch of little snippets from the Spirit of Prophecy into a paragraph or two. And in this particular case, I've done it, which really is just a wealth of information in just a couple. And then, to find the full quotes, you'd have to go into the footnotes to find it. But let me just read those if I can. Page 328. Starts with a quote, like 2/3 of the way down. There are many ways of practicing the healing art, but there is only one which heaven approves. Now, this is all one quote, this paragraph. God's remedies are the simple agencies of nature that will not tax or debilitate the system through their powerful properties. She says pure air and water, cleanliness, a proper diet, purity of life, and a firm trust in God are remedies for the want of which thousands are dying. Yet these remedies are going out of date because their skillful use requires work that people do not appreciate. Fresh air, exercise, pure air, and clean, sweet premises are within the reach of all with but little expense. But drugs are expensive, both in outlay of means and the effects produced upon the system. One of the things is sweet premises. What's that? Sweet premises. Yeah. How many people would just feel better if they were taught how to keep a sweet premise in their home?
No stress.
Right? Stress, cleanliness, somewhere comfortable to sit, that affects our health. I mean, talk about comprehensive understanding of health principles. For her day, it was just, but for our day, it's still revolutionary, So let me go into this 2 paragraphs where it's, goes through probably 30 quotes, but there's just little snippets. We can expand the list. Pure air, fresh air, deep breathing, pure water, cleanliness, clean, sweet premises, proper diet, abstemiousness, which means abstaining from things that we shouldn't be eating or taking in or doing, fasting, avoiding meat, purity of life, pure conscience, firm trust in God, prayer, gratitude, praise, singing, exercise, walking, visiting nature, simple herbs, catnip tea, pulverized charcoal, charcoal smartweed, water treatments, hydrotherapy, sunlight, rest, and helping others. That's a big list. And there's a footnote for every one of those. So that's an afternoon study right there. Now this is important too. Now let's add some descriptive phrases, simple agencies of nature, not taxing to the system, not debilitating to the system, requiring skillful work, little expense, hygienic method, leaves no baleful effects, cleanses the system, old-fashioned, simple home treatments, no deadly after effects, and harmless. It just says a bunch right there. Those are God's methods. And almost every one of those eliminates the idea of entertaining drugs. And then this last one, by contrast, she describes powerful drugs. Powerful properties, not natural, taxing, debilitating, a lazy method, expensive in means, expensive in effect, weakens and clogs, leaves a baleful influence, intricate names, deadly after effects, never heals disease, faithless, foreign substances of a poisonous nature, vegetable and mineral poisons, poisonous productions planted by Satan, paralyzes nature's effort to heal, requires no personal religion, non-hygienic agencies, unfavorable to natural laws, interferes with the laws of nature, weakens directly or through inheritance, that's an interesting one, increases the depreciation of the race. Wow. An offense to God. There's a sermon just in those paragraphs, isn't there? So I hope that helps. You know, a lot of times I think it helps to maybe clarify what the differences are in the system the world uses for health and the system that God has given us. And really, you know, I find sometimes people wanting to disagree, saying that really the system that we're using now in our hospitals really fits into God's plan. And my first reaction is to want to argue, but that's useless, because if they would take the time to just read those 3 paragraphs, it would be oh so clear. And either they just accept it or they don't, right? And so, I don't know. I think the time's coming where the world will really embrace what we have to offer. We're a lot closer to it than we were when I was a child, because there's just all the stuff that the natural whole health movement has produced. But I really think those couple there at the end, the depreciation of the race and weakening through inheritance, is going to start showing up. It already has started to show up, but I think it's going to start showing up in ways to where medicine is going to lose its apparently good effect, because we've so destroyed our mechanisms that it just can't deal with it anymore. And when that happens, the only thing left that will actually work is what we have to offer. And I believe using these methods that the Lord has given us, we can probably even undo the detrimental effects of some sinister things that people may now or in the future put in to what they're giving us. So just say that way to be kind, because I know there's a disagreement among people about, you know, what's going on right now. But, you know, I think there will be a lot of people that we have to deal with in the future who've been damaged by all different kinds of medicine. But this method, partly because it's designed to allow the body to regenerate, and partly because where these tactics and methods fall short, God steps in and makes up the difference. Amen. That there's really nothing that can't be accomplished in the health world if it's in the will of God. So.
And Bill, doesn't it come down to the question, not the question, the return, like the ancient message says, the return to God as the creator.
Yep.
Creator of our systems, of our bodies, who knows best how to treat them. We don't need to know the intricacies of the system because he knows. So all we need to do is to follow what he says, what to do with certain situations.
Yep.
Really that simple. So really, it's a spiritual question. It's a spiritual decision that people make.
Yep. And navigating the Twilight Zone, that chapter actually deals with some of the issues of how today to deal with the fact that, and this is kind of an important point. Had we as a people been faithful and God had been able to continue to develop this side of healthcare, what we would know today and what we would be able to do today in the faith that we as a people would have to introduce into the system would make this extremely effective. Extremely effective. But we don't have that. And that's what, hence the term Twilight Zone. We're kind of in the Twilight Zone because the competing system that God has given us isn't operational to its full capacity, to its full, partly because of our faith, a lack of faith, and partly because we stopped growing in the knowledge that He would have kept us growing in year after year after year. So how do we get caught in situations where we're just not sure which way to turn. We don't want Johnny to die in the next 4 hours, but we don't know how to keep him alive. And death right now is always a poor health choice if you're looking at it strictly from a health point of view. And so Ellen White actually addresses that in some situations and scenarios that the Lord expects us to do the best we can, and no, it wouldn't have been sin to give quinine to a boy who had malaria that ended up dying because his father wouldn't let him have it. He didn't know what else to do. And so there's a lot of issues that we have to deal with, and hopefully some of the material that's in that chapter will kind of help us start thinking about how we're going to deal with those issues for ourselves, for our families, and then eventually for people that we're ministering to. And it also answers some of the objections people have about the whole don't use drugs approach.